You know, for more than 50 years, Nigeria's Niger Delta has been pumping out incredible oil wealth. But for the people who actually live there, it's often meant environmental ruin. And that's the central paradox, right? A river of black gold flowing out of the country, leaving behind polluted lands and deep-seated conflict.
But what if you could just rewrite the rules? Well, in 2021, Nigeria passed this massive new law designed to do exactly that. It's called the Petroleum Industry Act. So in this explainer, we're going to break down what this law is all about, and more importantly, ask if it can actually fix this problem that's been around for decades.
Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll dig into that oil paradox in Nigeria. Then, we'll unpack the landmark 2021 law itself and really zoom in on its main idea, something called the host community trust. After that, we're going to get critical and look at the promises versus the real-world problems. And we'll wrap up with what experts say needs to happen to make this whole thing actually work.
Right. So before we can really get why this new law is such a huge deal, we first have to understand the mind-boggling scale of Nigeria's oil industry and the very long history of failed attempts to fix it.
Get this, 95%. That is how much of Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings come from oil and gas. I mean, the entire national economy pretty much runs on it. So this isn't just another industry, it's the financial lifeblood of the country. And that makes the stakes for everyone involved just incredibly high. And for decades, the government has tried to solve this disconnect between all that oil money and the poverty on the ground. Just look at this timeline. It shows a long list of agencies and ministries all set up with the goal of developing the Niger Delta. But, as critics point out, these top-down, often political efforts, they pretty much failed to deliver, leaving communities feeling totally left behind and fueling a lot of unrest. And that brings us to 2021 and the Petroleum Industry Act, or the PIA. You know, after years and years of debate, this thing was supposed to be the new rulebook, a total reset of the relationship between the government, the big oil companies, and of course, the communities that host all the infrastructure. And if you look at the official language of the law, you can see just how ambitious it is. The goals here aren't just about managing problems. They're about fostering prosperity, providing direct benefits, enhancing peace, and creating a solid framework for development. It's a fundamental shift, really, from seeing community development as some kind of corporate charity to making it a core part of doing business.
So, how exactly does the law plan to do all this? Well, the absolute centerpiece of the whole thing is a new structure called the Host Communities Development Trust.
Okay, so the crucial part you have to get is this. The HCDT is not optional. It's not voluntary. Oil companies, which the law calls settlers, are now legally required to set up and fund these trusts. This moves all that community funding from the old, kind of unreliable model of corporate social responsibility to a formal legal obligation. It's a big change.
So where does the cash come from? Well, every year, companies have to contribute 3% of their operating expenses, their OPEX, from the year before. And the law gets super specific about how that money gets used. 75% goes straight into a capital fund for actual development projects. 20% is set aside in a reserve fund. Think of it as an investment for the future, for when the oil runs out. And the last 5% is for administrative costs. Now let's talk about the power structure, because it's a very clear top-down hierarchy. Right at the top, you have the oil company, the settler. They create the trust, and this is key, they appoint the board of trustees. That board then picks a management committee to run the day-to-day stuff. And that committee then appoints an advisory committee, which is supposed to represent the community's interests. Now remember this structure, okay? Because it's going to become really important in just a minute. So, that's the blueprint on paper. But now, a couple years into its implementation, a different picture is starting to emerge. Are the big promises of this landmark law actually matching the reality on the ground? And this is where that gap between promise and reality gets really stark. The law promised community-led development, but the reality is the oil company controls who's on the board and has the final say on the development plans. It promised a direct flow of money, but communities have no way to check if that 3% contribution is even accurate because company operating expenses are not public. And instead of new leadership, we're seeing the same old guards, political elites, and even ex-company staff taking over the boards. And far from creating peace, all these implementation issues are actually sparking brand new conflicts.
This quote from Inarua Wills, who is a former environment commissioner from the heart of the Delta, it really captures the deepest fear that a lot of experts have. I mean, the term corporate colonization, that's a really powerful phrase. It suggests that the law, even with its good intentions, might actually end up strengthening corporate control over communities instead of empowering them.
And there are other major red flags too. There's a super controversial clause that says a community can lose its development funding to pay for repairs if oil pipelines get vandalized in their area. It's basically a form of collective punishment. The regulations also don't have clear rules for including women, young people, or people with disabilities in leadership roles. And maybe most critically, the government regulator has been really slow to punish companies that have blown past their deadlines for setting up these trusts in the first place.
So if the rollout is this flawed, what's the solution? Well, analysts aren't just pointing out what's wrong. They're also laying out a pretty clear path forward to get this law back on track and fulfill its original promise.
The recommendations are really direct and actionable. First off, empower communities by teaching them about their rights under this law. The regulator absolutely has to start enforcing sanctions. To fix the transparency mess, different government agencies need to work together to make company finances public, so everyone can finally verify that 3% number. There's a big call for mandatory quotas for inclusion, for all the trust budgets to be made public, and to stick to a simple one asset, one trust rule to stop fights before they start.
And all of this leaves us with one final big question. The Petroleum Industry Act wrote a whole new rulebook, one with the potential to completely transform the Niger Delta. But here's the thing. A rulebook is only as good as the referee who's willing to enforce it. The real challenge, at its core, is still about power, transparency, and accountability. The question is, who is going to step up and make sure the game is finally played fair?